The Holy Gospel according to St. John, the 21st chapter. After he had appeared to his followers in Jerusalem, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he showed himself in this way. Gathered there together were Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples. Simon Peter said to them, "I am going fishing." They said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, you have no fish, have you?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net to the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on some clothes, for he was naked, and jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, only about 100 yards off. When they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." The second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt because he had said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." He said this to indicate the kind of death that he would glorify God with. After this, he said to him, "Follow me." This is the gospel of our Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. You know, what strikes me and encourages me so much about the scriptures when I read them is how real they are. If the disciples just made up this story about Jesus, who he was and how he was born, the people that he healed, how he died, and most especially how he rose from the dead and came back to life, if they just made this story up to become famous and make a name for themselves, wouldn't they have painted themselves in a better light than we often see them? Wouldn't they portray themselves as always faithful to Jesus, making the right choices, always having the right words, and perhaps putting themselves at the center of the miracles and the healings instead of having the focus on Jesus? Yet we see a very different picture of the disciples. Many times they were still trying to figure out just who Jesus was during his ministry. At one point, they wanted to call down fire from heaven to destroy someone who was working against them. They questioned Jesus and looked at him like he was crazy when he told them to have 5,000 people sit down on the hillsides of Galilee, and then said that 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread were enough to feed everyone. And to their disbelief, it was enough. You know, they didn't understand that Jesus is the multiplier, the Lord of the universe. 2 fish and 5 loaves are more than enough when they are placed in Jesus' hands. They questioned Jesus again at the tomb of his friend Lazarus. when Jesus said to open the tomb up after Lazarus had been dead for 3 days. They were awestruck when Jesus spoke those words, "Lazarus, come out." And the dead man came out of his own tomb, still wrapped in his grave clothes. And then, so suddenly, the tide of public opinion turned on their beloved teacher, and he was handed over to 2 corrupt rulers, Herod and Pilate. And they tortured him and made fun of him and spat on him and then crucified him. And when all that came tragically together, the disciples all abandoned Jesus, especially Peter. Jesus told Peter that it was going to happen. And when Peter renounced that he ever knew Jesus, the scriptures tell us that Jesus looked at him, and Peter ran away from Jesus, and he wept bitterly, ashamed, embarrassed, torn, afraid. And all of this so often reminds me of us, church. Don't we have moments in our faith where our faith just seems so crisp, so strong, so clear, only to have a life tragedy or some other challenging event make us behave a lot like Peter and doubt everything that Jesus has told us and deny that Jesus could even be right? We run as hard and as long as we can away from the arms of the one who died for us. I think we can see ourselves, and I think we can see in ourselves our own walk of faith mirrored in the lives that we read of the disciples. And yet we know that God is the author of this very story we read, and he is indeed the author of the story that we live as our lives. For all of the tragedy that the disciples fell into, also falling into their own fear and getting caught in that, and then for all of the tragedy and hardship we live through and our fears and falling and tripping through that and following Jesus, we don't see a vindictive Jesus. We don't see a vindictive and angry God. Even after the crucifixion and the resurrection, we see the total opposite. We see grace, mercy, love, and help given to people when they deserve entirely the opposite. We see the very heart of God, what is inside the motivation for God for us. In his interaction with the disciples that early morning, the 3rd time that he appeared to his fearful band of followers after he destroyed the hold of death. The disciples did what I bet each of us would do after their miraculous 3-year walk with Jesus took a tragic nosedive and crashed. They were traumatized by those events. Those events pushed them through to their breaking points. They saw the face of everything they feared when Jesus hung and died on that cross. And they were jolted and stunned, shocked and struggling, and now delicate in faith again after Jesus appeared to them, locked away in their hiding place, with the world still out to get them. It was all just too much. They couldn't understand it. Maybe they were just afraid of it all. And so they were just numb. And they did what each of us might do after that kind of turbulence and tragedy. They went back to what they knew. They didn't know what else to do. They were confused and numb and went back to fishing. How else were they going to live? Maybe you're there in that same emotional place that the disciples were. Maybe you're feeling like they did, and so you go back to what you know. You try and find some normalcy in life again. And I just love this picture of Jesus. I love that this passage shows us that Jesus is there with us on the other side of those turbulent times in life when we don't know which way is up. Look at this scene and see how Jesus meets his disciples. One disciple quietly says to the other, "I'm going to go fish." And the others are still confused that having seen Jesus alive after his resurrection, they're still numb, still half in grief, and so the others just say, "We'll go with you." And so, defeated, the group gathers their nets, they go back to life, they get back in their boat, and they do what they just knew to do before they ever met Jesus. They throw their nets over the side of the boat and they wait to see if they catch anything again. Can you imagine what their mood must have been like, hearing the water slap against that quiet boat side? And nothing. They catch nothing. All night long and into the morning. And there it is, in the confusion, in the afterward, in the defeat, God comes to meet them again. And he stands on their seashore, right there looking out towards them, alive. And he's watching this confused and this depressed group. And he asks them, kind of tongue-in-cheek, "Children, have you caught no fish?" Children, did you catch what God called the people, the very ones that abandoned him at his greatest need in the hour of his death? Other translations tell us he called them friends. And after his disciples abandoned him and ran away from him when he was crucified, Jesus saw and still sees the bigger picture in life. He knows human frailty and that we often struggle and we question. And that is precisely the reason that Jesus went to the cross for us and for those disciples. Jesus is on the other side of the tragedy. Back again. No weaker, no less miraculous, no less loving than he was before he was crucified. And he greets his disciples on the other side of tragedy, and he makes breakfast for them. He multiplies fish again, just like when he fed the 5,000. And then he turns to Peter, and 3 times he asks him if he loves him. And what Peter thinks is Jesus doubting is actually Jesus reinstating him and commissioning him for ministry as a disciple of the risen Christ. And it is there in that moment between Peter and Jesus that we can know that we worship that same Jesus who reinstated Peter. And that Peter is a picture for us. For all of the times that we struggle through life crises and life hardships, and we question, and we doubt God, and we run from God, he is there. In the middle of our life storms. And also there on the other side of the storm. To gather us in his arms once again, to call us his children, to feed us, to work miracles again, and to forgive us, and to reinstate us, so that we too may know the heart of God's love for us, and share it with the world just the way the disciples did. And because they had that encounter with Jesus, and he forgave and reinstated them, you're sitting here today.